Welcome to Get Wisdom Live with Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. What if God was also a co-host? What if the historically rare ability to question God directly and get profound answers back has been rediscovered? What would God say to today's sophisticated but deeply troubled world? Get Wisdom Live is here to share those answers with you. Here is Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. Welcome to another episode of Get Wisdom Live. I'm Brian Kelly, along with Get Wisdom founder and director, Carl Mollison. This week, Creator discusses the ether and its importance. Now, Carl, if you walked up to the person on the street, right, just a random person on the street and asked them what the ether was, I would probably think most would look at you blankly and say, I don't know. And a few others would probably say, well, isn't that stuff that you pour on a rag and put over somebody's mouth if you want to kidnap them, But it turns out that the ether is an important term and one that is known by people that study metaphysics and mysticism and spirituality. And it's something that we want to explore because it's actually mentioned in the LHP, Lightworker Healing Protocol. And we also want to explore not only the proper definition of it, but also what it doesn't mean. It's just as important, Carl.
Well, we'll see. I feel sometimes like we're kind of sweeping out the barn all too often with old metaphysical lore and new age misconceptions and distortions of thinking and psychic perceptions that might be misunderstood and misapplied, but no one else understands it any better. And so those things stand for a while, the definitions and the meaning and so on. So, we'll see if this is useful to folks or not, but we're kind of revisiting the past to get to the future. I'm not a big fan of doing it, but sometimes I guess it's important. So we'll see. You be the judge.
Here we go. U.S. Creator, there is a book containing collective lectures by Austrian intuitive seer Rudolf Steiner titled The Reappearance of Christ in the Etheric, a collection of lectures on the second coming of Christ. Sounds like an important topic to dive into, and perhaps we will later on in the future some point. But in looking at that, it's got in the etheric, what does that mean? So to explore this topic in a future show, it is first important to clarify what is meant by the term etheric. An article on EckhartYoga.com states, the ancient Greeks saw ether as a godlike element and a substance that allowed humans to connect to spirituality and intuition. Ancient yogis saw ether as that which was unbound and all-pervasive and the element of potentiality, unquote. What is Creator's perspective and definition of the words ether and etheric?
Okay, here we go. This is what Creator answered. Ether is a metaphysical term and has been adopted at times by science as well to convey a kind of energy field in which unusual things are harbored and may happen. It is mostly conceptual because of its elusive nature, going unrecognized for millennia, except for intuitive speculations, but not appreciated by others with less psychic ability. The subject comes up from time to time, and the term serves a useful purpose in conveying this very notion of a kind of web of energy with special properties that can connect various things in various ways and thus has a role to play somehow in assisting things that happen, things of importance, and this is all quite true. We would say the best definition for ether is a kind of ultimate worldwide web, but going through all of creation, not simply the earth as your stomping grounds. What it consists of is a special kind of energy of consciousness, our consciousness, because the universe is our creation after all. Why would a universe of our creation have to be made up of something outside us? And if already there to serve like modeling clay, who created that? And how might that work if we commandeer it and assign it to a new purpose? As our consciousness, it is an aspect of our being, and thus, by definition, special from your perspective, but it is also distinct because it differs somewhat from the energy of consciousness you utilize in various forms. In a sense, they are an offshoot of the ether and use the ether as well as a conveyance through being in resonance, in tune, and vibrating harmonically. So here we get into more of a scientific analysis of an interplay. But all of this is needed in various ways to address the kinds of questions you are interested in exploring. This is a difficult arena because of the lack of knowledge within your culture and language, also, as many concepts have no words to describe them which are meaningful to you. So we will need to rely much on parallels with physical processes of various kinds and metaphorical representations as a kind of example to explore the properties of this wondrous realm. Keep in mind that the concept of ether was perceived by intuitives at times throughout history, but with very little mechanistic understanding of its origins, purpose, makeup, and mechanistic operation. Thus, it is often a term loosely applied with an assumption that what is being observed or conjectured operates via the ether in some mysterious way. That does not mean such attributions are always accurate in applying that analysis. So, whether the ether is formally involved or not in phenomena is a significant distinction, at least in understanding the truth of things and being able to establish a foundation with accurate knowledge so you can probe more deeply. This is important to gain a more insightful and elaborate understanding of various phenomena that impinge on the ether and its properties without introducing distortions and error, mixing apples and oranges, as the risks are always great that will happen, given the varied accuracy of psychic awareness and interpretations by many intuitives through the ages.
So, Creator calls it a wondrous realm. That's an interesting use of words. Um, so, it's an important feature, I guess, of creation and of Creator's consciousness is what we're essentially being told here, Carl.
Yeah, it's a sea of energy, it's a sea of consciousness. This is the missing link, I am told, in really providing a unified field theory for physics, especially in the quantum realm. Science is way, 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 way behind, but the intuitives aren't really helping the process along because they're not probing in the right way and they get wrapped up in jargon and misunderstandings. And there's still mental conceptions of this
Mhm.
because no one can really exploit it directly or test it or prove its existence using conventional means, scientific
Right.
measurement processes. So this is a complicated discussion to begin with, and not of any interest to most people, but it is the fundamental workings of the universe. So it deserves to be defined in a way to make it more clear. This is one of the things we try to do with Get Wisdom: bring clarity to the needs of the world, and especially in things that matter, and getting at the idea of the divine and its role in things and how to take advantage of that for human welfare.
Yeah, absolutely. U.S. creator Steiner wrote, "Ether is another term which is far from popular today, which we've kind of indicated already. The element which is more subtle and ethereal than the physical body is an etheric body which is spiritual by nature." Unquote. Steiner further writes, "We have created the spiritual and etheric archetypes out of the world of spirit long before we come down into life on earth. It contains forces which we may call forces of spiritual magnetism, and which draw us to the parents and who we feel will give us the hereditary attributes which will allow us to enter life on earth." Unquote. Steiner further asserts, "It is the spiritual part of your physical body. It is the spirit which enters into every part of your physical body and fills it with its powers. The wisdom which radiates towards you is the activity, the mobility of your ether body." Unquote. What is Creator's perspective?
All right. And Creator says the following. This question immediately illustrates what we were addressing in our prior answer, that much discussion about the so called ether leads to vague understandings and the need to fall back on much jargon that is devised to help describe particular phenomena, not truly understanding whether they are part and parcel of the ether, or a variant, or an extension, or a subcomponent, or something simply using the ether in some fashion, but truly comprised of something separate, and so on. Because of the complexity of understanding creation in its various forms, there is much room for confusing and confounding things, and jargon is a frequent reason this happens because each person's jargon may well differ, and all that does is create a kind of smokescreen around a subject. So, depending on your point of entry, going through one intuitive versus another, you will enter the smoke with preconceived ideas of what the interior will look like, and it will begin to shape your own thinking and how you see something, and how you understand it, and create your own description. This is why people wanting to probe something of interest, using other work done before them as a starting point, create new complications as well as clarification, oftentimes. We do like general broad concepts, and we do like using conventional language as much as possible rather than relying on vague metaphysical terms, given this checkered history of variable definitions and applicability, varying according to individual intuitives' understandings and perceptions, and then rendering a kind of assessment or judgment about what it all means. If there are fine points that are glossed over, that is always a hazard. And this is no different than in any other sphere of knowledge, that the general outlines are just that, a starting point, a kind of broad, overarching framework. But that does not preclude there being many twists and turns, variations, subcomponents, and much going on mechanistically to connect things together to make things happen, and so on. So we would say that the concept of ether, as applied to the workings of the body, is better described by talking about consciousness. So, even though consciousness has varying forms and makeup, if you substitute the word ether, it is true about ether as well. So, we prefer one general term over the other because we think it will better bridge to newer thinking and an ultimate better understanding of how things are truly operating in the world and the universe beyond. For example, the idea of your essence as a spiritual being truly an expression of consciousness, better connects to the capability you have to project your consciousness forth beyond the body, to go anywhere within the universe, in fact, and witness and even experience many things remotely while sitting comfortably in an armchair or reclining in a state of meditative relaxation to facilitate the journey. That is more straightforward and we think better grasped by people than saying there was an out of body journey while inhabiting the etheric body. That gives a people a label for something still not well understood or differentiated as to mechanism, but we'll think of it more as a shadow of the self or a layer of the self, perhaps a kind of vibrational replica that is less physical but more vibrational in its totality, and thus able to exhibit quite unique properties compared to the physical matter of the physical body itself. So people understand they can assume spirit form and might journey down from heaven in spirit form to meet up with the physical body, and then, on death of the body, emerge back in spirit form to ascend to the heavenly realm, ideally. If that is a body of consciousness launched from heaven, coming down to enter a physical housing and present to enliven it, literally bring it to life as a sentient being and not a collection of animal flesh, it is a union of consciousness with physical material to provide a container. And this is a more direct description, even though simplistic still, but without too much jargon getting in the way.
Well, I like Creator's answer here. To me, it kind of sounds like Creator's pointing out the problem of, say, a dozen people sitting around and arguing about what the Grand Canyon looks like who's never been there, right? They're basically operating on what they've been told or maybe heard from somebody else, and now they're trying to get an understanding of what it's all about. But Creator, even in this answer, says that it's really the testimony of intuitives is where we even come up with these concepts to begin with. They're trying to put words to something that really is very hard to put words to, Carl.
Well, but I think to get a kind of deeper and immediate recognition and understanding of something, talking about being in spirit form versus physical form is more in people's thinking because this has been talked about all through history. The spirit realm, that there is a great spirit who is the author of all of this, and so on. And then to think of that as consciousness, as a kind of spirit being in the moment, brings it together in a way that is a little easier to understand than start to give out series of jargony terms for the different aspects and presences and manifestations. That's
Right.
that's all we're saying here, I think, is what Creator is wanting to simplify and avoid the confusion that's caused by past practice.
Yeah, and I can certainly appreciate that desire. No question about it. U.S. Creator Steiner says the etheric body is something visible only to clairvoyant perception. What is Creator's perspective?
And Creator says this is accurate as far as it goes, but does little to further explain this etheric body. Thinking of it as a kind of consciousness at once would be accepted as something elusive, something not visible to ordinary senses, because it is ephemeral, something that clearly has a power and an influence on things, but through thought in ordinary experience. And that's something that can be observed as physically present, for example. So we see these comments as more clouding the issue than providing clarity, other than to bridge the gap between Steiner and his attempts to understand his own perceptions with a more contemporary perspective we would prefer be fostered by your explorations.
So, Steiner was obviously trying to explain to probably basically non-clairvoyant people what he was seeing clairvoyantly when he did clairvoyant explorations, and that's always going to be a challenging undertaking, I'm sure, Carl.
Well, it's what we're about to get wisdom. And we're bringing forth a body of knowledge based on these kinds of precepts that I think will be helpful. And it's not that I'm trying to change the world, rule the world, be the center of things. It has nothing to do with me. It has to do with divine wisdom and a desire to help the world. And that's what we're bringing forth, help for the world in clarification, among other things. And it's all
Absolutely.
leading to a healing that is greatly needed. And if we're misunderstanding, misinterpreting, speaking this plethora of languages, we know how destructive that can be with the whole world. What is that, 120 different languages or something?
Yeah.
It makes it tough. So some unification, streamlining, simplification is well intended. It may upset people, it might rub them the wrong way. Everyone has vested interests in their lore. I get that. So this is never easy. It's like giving birth to a new being. It
Yeah.
has some pain and suffering along the way.
But Creator is acknowledging that, somebody with clairvoyant abilities is perhaps seeing something, in terms of consciousness and energy that somebody who doesn't have those intuitive capacities is blind to, essentially. And that's an important distinction to keep in mind.
Well, and it's an example of why this is something that's known but not very understood by science because it is elusive. It is hard to pin it down. And science is still debating whether consciousness is real.
Yeah. And science has a tendency to want to avoid working with intuitives. It just, there's very few scientists that will take the time to actually even study intuitives or ask questions about them, much less partner with them in terms of some kind of scientific exploration.
Yes.
You ask, Creator, in an outline of esoteric science, the book that Steiner wrote, Steiner explains that all living things, plants, animals, and humans, have a subtle etheric body that makes life possible. At the time of death, the etheric body separates from the physical body, and the physical body decays following the laws of inorganic chemistry. Is this true? What becomes of the etheric body following death?
All right, Creator says, here again is this term etheric body, which we would recommend replacing with consciousness. So each thing you can perceive with your ordinary senses, whether living or seemingly inanimate objects, all have consciousness. And that is because there is a purpose behind the existence of everything in the universe. There is a logic here. If you think about this for a moment, if dead bodies decay and are no more, would there be a benefit for us to create something that is dead and lifeless? A blob of matter with no particular function or utility, even as only a foundation or springboard for something with a greater purpose and power present within it. This is why everything in creation has consciousness. The physical matter is simply a location, a kind of container and representation in physical form of what that consciousness is all about. This is why a rock in its consciousness look like a rock, whereas a person in its consciousness look like a person. They are truly different in purpose and not so much in composition. Each has consciousness as well as a material or physical embodiment within the physical plane where each resides. Consciousness cannot be destroyed. Its link to things can be broken. Physical matter can be transformed through energy of various kinds to change its properties. This may prevent its connection to the consciousness intended for it to hold, as when an animal or person is killed and the consciousness must leave eventually and journey forth, leaving that so called matter behind because it is no longer of use. The ability to connect and animate it or experience its existence in a less obvious role, as with a rock, is thus precluded. If you subject a rock to the blast of an atomic bomb, it will likely disintegrate into a form of energy that is disorganized, so it cannot reform into a rock again, but will dissipate and join the elemental energy of the ether, the vast web of consciousness. So here we ourselves use the word ether because there is a basic understanding within physics of an energy field that has been renamed the 0 point field. So there is some wisdom in bridging the connections to current applied knowledge, to some degree at least, to help inform where the interconnections lie and help the scientific community gain a better understanding of the arena of consciousness than has developed heretofore. We would say, in general terms, that whenever there is death or destruction of something in the physical, its consciousness will go elsewhere, often to rejoin with other consciousness. It may retain its knowledge, awareness, and learning through its connection to the Akashic records of all that happens, but it will live on because consciousness is immortal, as is energy. Both can be reworked and repurposed, but that will only happen for particular reasons. This is why we have told you your soul is immortal, that it has a purpose, and we intended in your creation for you to live forever as a part of us, because we do not wish to die any more than you do. So if we take part of ourselves to create you, it is because we intend to keep you going and not lose you along the way. It is the same with the physical realm and the consciousness it contains. That is an extension of ours as well, with different purpose behind it. And so it has different ways of acting. And this will also determine where it goes and what it does and how it can interact with other forms of consciousness and so on. But you can appreciate from this discussion how reducing these phenomena to a discussion of consciousness having various forms, functions, and purposes creates a kind of unifying theory and description that will help people, and especially the scientific community, being so backward in understanding where they need to go to begin to make a sense of things more completely and break out of the stranglehold of the materialist view of things, thinking only of the tangible, like particles and waves, that are physical properties that can be observed and measured with conventional tools in the physical.
So I think the really important sentence in this channeling, Carl, is so here we ourselves, talking about creator, use the word ether because there's a basic understanding within physics of an energy field that has been renamed the zero point field. So you've done a webinar on zero point energy, Carl. So we've here at Get Wisdom have explored this point, but this is the first time I've seen creator actually connect these two words quite directly.
Well, it's been mentioned before, and that's why we use the term in the training for the Lightworker Healing Protocol, because the field of energy, the fundamental elemental sea of consciousness that Creator calls the ether, and many through the ages have, that back to the Greeks, this is kind of where this came from. This needs to be appreciated for what it represents, and it is a springboard for other types of uses of consciousness as an energetic force. And so we are concerned about the maintaining of this and the health of it. It can be damaged by things that are happening. And this includes sentient beings. And this is just one of those things. It's another environmental footprint effect, if you
Right.
will, of life. So we're just taking that into account and working on it. Einstein talked about the ether, and trying to understand the emerging insights about the quantum realm, that
Sure.
this
Yeah.
ether is some kind of a weird aspect of nature where strange things happen. The spooky action at a distance he talked about, the quantum entanglement of things. It happens in the ether.
Yeah.
And that is true. It's this sea of fundamental energy, but it is consciousness.
I think the fact that it's consciousness is maybe why creator is hanging on to the term instead of suggesting to us that we replace it with zero point field, because zero point field, to me at least, on first brush, comes across as a kind of atheistic concept that it's an energy field but doesn't necessarily contain consciousness, whereas
Yeah.
the term ether uh, more connotes a sea of consciousness. So
Yeah. Well, we'll
again,
see
we're
who, yeah, we'll see who ends up being dominant here.
yeah.
But I agree that the 0 point field is scientific jargon
Right.
that's
Right.
not based on any deeper understanding, and certainly less deep than what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So, we'll see what happens, but for the moment, we're helping people understand in bridging the gap, we have to contend with both concepts.
Right.
They're the same, but you can't get to what we're talking about going to look at the science, because they don't have the understanding of what the 0 point field really is yet.
Oh, completely agreed. U.S. creator. The Earth itself is also made up of different bodies. There is, of course, the physical body we are all familiar with in the lower astral plane. Souls trapped in the astral plane are called ghosts and are said to be earthbound. Creator said in prior channelings that the lower astral is connected to the physical plane and that the rules of engagement governing life incarnated on Earth still apply to departed souls trapped in the lower astral plane or Earth's astral body. These are the souls said to be stuck in limbo. But little has been said about an etheric body and dimension or realm of Earth itself. Is there such a thing? And how do the rules of engagement apply to one said to be present in this realm? Are they still considered an inhabitant of Earth, for instance? Do the rules of engagement governing free will still apply to one said to be in residence in the etheric realm of the earth? Can Creator sort all this out for us, Carl?
Well, first off, Creator says, here again, we see the consequence of introducing jargon. You are essentially chasing a phantom here called an etheric body, when this is simply the spirit body leaving the body. Or, in more precise terms, as we have exemplified in our discussion here, what emerges is a form of consciousness that is an extension of your soul and an extension of our consciousness in turn. So when your body passes away, your consciousness will leave the body in spirit form and make its way forth. The intentions you hold will determine where you go, if anywhere at all. You could hover over your corpse and remain in that spot indefinitely. You could sense it in some way and follow it to the morgue and even to a graveside through unawareness and a state of ignorance about what is really happening, not realizing you are dead. You could wander about more broadly and bump into dark spirits who live in this lower astral plane as predators and get into serious trouble, becoming hindered and then exploited as a source of energy and held down by the experience, and never make your way to the higher astral plane of the heavenly realm. But it will be your consciousness trapped in limbo and attacked by parasites wanting to sap your strength to keep themselves alive. So, to avoid using the word consciousness for every state of being, existence, location, phenomenon, and so on, it is helpful to think of having a matrix of raw energy you could call the ether or the zero point field, as physicists do, and think of that as a kind of disorganized raw form of consciousness that can be a conveyance and a source of further energy to be shaped by consciousness of a higher order and capability. So, your soul essence that inhabits your body and contributes to your thinking is a form of consciousness that will leave the body one day and remain intact. It first enters the lower astral plane, but will be met by light callers coming from the heavenly realm to greet you and invite you to be escorted back to the light. The rules of engagement still apply for you until you are safely back home. You can stray, you can get lost, you can become frustrated and give up. You can remain harboring your earthly cares and prejudices, even things like grudges and hatred, and that can hold you back as well. If, when you die, you are hating God because your life to you was unsatisfying or even a kind of torture, that will keep God away. And when you die, you will be on your own. As long as you harbor those beliefs and even feelings you will be capable of having. Even without a physical body, they will be sensed in a different way, but they will matter because they are an intention. And it is intentions entirely that will determine what your consciousness does, how it expresses itself, and how it is reckoned with by the divine realm to interact or not, to form a partnership or allow you to decide everything and take the lead entirely, even though you will not be as adept as divine beings coming from the light to guide you. This is why so many people become trapped in the lower astral plane as earthbound spirits when they die, because they are not prepared to continue their journey, being in a state of ignorance and often depletion and dishevelment.
Well, one trend that's emerging from all these channelings, Carl, is I get the idea that Creator has a distinct dislike of connecting the word ether with the word body. And in fact, one definition he has here is consciousness that will leave the body. So your soul essence is the consciousness that will leave the body one day and will remain intact. So the consciousness remains intact in the astral plane if you're stuck in limbo, or remains intact as you ascend to the light. But Creator doesn't want to put the term body on that. And I kind of get that because we don't talk about angels in terms of really having bodies either. They're spirits, right?
Well, and it's a transformation of energy. And largely what this 0 point field or the ether does is to provide the energy to create the physical body with.
Yeah.
And we use some of that physical energy from the ether on an ongoing basis to keep the body going. The soul doesn't keep creating new cells in your body. Your body does that via its consciousness to be productive, to be proliferating and keeping itself healthy with a kind of balanced set of instructions that come from the soul element of your spirit consciousness as a creative force to shape it, give it its structure, and it's the raw energy coming from the ether that keeps your body going and determines what it looks like because it's physical matter on display physically. So that is not consciousness per se. It's a
Right.
product of consciousness, taking the raw energy of the ether and shaping it into your form.
Well, this term I like again from Creator of consciousness that remains intact, maybe as opposed to consciousness that is dispersed, like which is the raw material of the ether. And if we think about what Creator has said about dark spirits someday dying, so to speak, they will disperse and cease to exist, and their energy will be resorbed into the sea of the ether, essentially. So, when Creator says, consciousness that remains intact, Creator doesn't want to put the word body on that. So I kind of get that, but yeah,
Well,
it's interesting.
another analogy that might be helpful here is thinking of electricity as a raw form of energy and the way electricity runs through a computer and the computer programs and causes things to happen, like ordering something from Amazon or
Right.
creating something new you can sell as a product to people that's digital in nature but has a utility and so on. So that's all driven by electricity, that raw energy.
Hmm.
But it's not electricity anymore. You see, this is a product of electricity. So the ether is providing raw energy to make the body what it is, and the creation of the body uses that raw energy. But it's not the raw energy of the ether anymore on display. It's an end product
Right.
of
So
the shaping of that energy into something different.
the ether is like raw material energy, kind of like
Yes.
iron ore is raw material before it becomes iron later on.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And another analogy in what Creator is telling us here is God took some of its consciousness, gave it to us as discrete beings with a discrete soul to be independent to some degree, but still a part of Creator.
Mhm.
But we don't call ourselves God, do we?
No.
We're a kind of an offshoot, a kind of manifestation and an explication of that consciousness of the Almighty and its potential in a kind of mini version. But that is something that is now changed. You see, we're different in some respect from where we came from.
Right.
And so we deserve to be thinking a little bit differently about it. But that heritage is valuable. And the link to it all is consciousness on the march,
Yeah.
taking different forms and roles and purposes and making new things happen.
Yeah. Interesting. You asked Creator, is there a connection between the etheric body? And again, we know that Creator doesn't like the term etheric and body connected together, so we could probably rephrase this question and say, is there a connection between the etheric and the deep subconscious? Are they perhaps one and the same? If not, what is the relationship between them?
Well, even that is not a proper question because you're going back to the ether, and it isn't
Yeah.
the ether that's in us, it's our spirit consciousness
Right. Right.
from the soul. Okay. So this is entirely a misperception of the phenomenology here, but that's
Yes.
okay. Creator will explain it. Creator says the deep subconscious is your soul essence as a form of consciousness that is in a pure state, although no longer existing as a light being with a full range of ability to manipulate things. It is heavily constrained and attenuated, being in the heavy energy of the physical, held within a physical body that limits its reach in terms of the physical plane. But it can roam about intuitively and will visit the Akashic records and inspect what it can see about its own existence in many other timelines, particularly other lifetimes, and gain an understanding of what it has gone through. The deep subconscious realizes there is an important body of knowledge there that will have an influence on the present and the future as well. It worries a good deal about the past suffering because that will all still resonate. It will be painful to look at, even if bad things have happened. And this will stir up fear about what might be coming if the current life seems to be following a similar path that got you into trouble in other times and places. So, here again, what matters is your consciousness, not an etheric form of your being. So, it would be better to dispense with that term.
More than willing to accommodate that request.
Well,
I
these are
think it's
pre-planned questions
yes.
that show, the persistence of thinking when that's lodged in your mind, and the springboard or the starting point for
Yeah.
an inquiry.
Well, I
But
think
it's
it's
okay.
useful. I think it's useful to reiterate this because etheric body is not my invention. It's something that's come from a lot of Eastern religions have the concept embedded in their doctrine. Yoga has the concept of etheric body, so it's pretty widespread amongst a lot of metaphysical philosophies. So to
Well, but
reiterate that this is something that Creator doesn't think is useful, I think is useful in itself.
well, that's the point of it. We're not just beating up on this because it's not our jargon. We
Right.
want new jargon. It's to simplify and make it more understandable with new insight about the divine plan and coming from the source, the true source of its creation. So it would serve us to pay attention and honor that tutorial that we're being given here, because it's a way out of this labyrinth of misguided thinking. And you can see this is what has developed. It's not maybe the end of the world because it's all theoretical.
Right.
But theory has practical applications too. So let's
Sure.
not forget that.
Well, hang in there as we ask one more kind of misguided question, but we get some really good answer and response. You ask Creator, is there a connection between the etheric body and the higher self? What is the nature of that connection?
All right, Creator says, as we have been describing, what Steiner would call the etheric body is simply a part of your consciousness that resides within the physical plane, and being a part of you is connected to your higher self as well. The latter is better understood as being another level of your mind, even though it resides within the divine realm, and thus is a closer intermediary between you and the physical and your soul proper that resides up within the light. It is perplexing, to be sure, for people to think of themselves as being on a kind of tether leading up to heaven. It does not seem possible for that to be the case without getting the wires tangled somehow, or perhaps reaching the end of your tether and being held back somehow, and so on. That is a metaphor only. When you think of the fact consciousness we are speaking of is, in effect, in a different dimension, having a higher vibrational existence, and forms of it being non local, meaning it can extend anywhere and everywhere at once. This is a rather profound reality, difficult to grasp, but very meaningful to put in perspective some of the more prosaic descriptions, like an etheric body representing your consciousness when it is not the body to begin with, and can extend throughout the universe, in fact, and does on the part of the deep subconscious portion of your mind. So consciousness can take many forms and has many potentials. What gets expressed is a function of the intention, and that in turn derives from the purpose of its origin and existence in the first place and what it is intended to be a part of, whether a person or a sunflower, for example.
Well, I think we see here in this response expressly why Creator doesn't like the word body attached to the word etheric, is because it's too limiting. A body denotes a boundary, something that has a hard reality to it. Whereas Creator is talking about non-local consciousness that can extend anywhere and everywhere at once, and that somebody in the spirit form, especially like an angel or Christ, can actually appear simultaneously to many different people at the same time. I mean, that's not something you would associate with the boundary of a body, So I think I see what Creator's getting at here.
Well, the other thing to maybe expand the perspective even a little more is God, from the very beginning in the scriptures and before that, this sense of things, there's something that is vastly greater than we can even understand as a physical being, giving God the properties of omniscience and omnipotence, that it can be everywhere and know everything and be all powerful to influence anything, anywhere. That is the ultimate non-local, ultimate power on display. Non-local consciousness. That is the essence of what God is, a
Sure.
vast non-local consciousness, meaning that it's everywhere. And God has said in this channeling, it's in us. And it's in this ether, this raw fundamental energy. Everything came from Creator. And this is why we talk often of the divine human, because we are a part of the divine. And so we share some of that ability to not only have non local consciousness, but do things with it. And that's what we're driving things towards with Get Wisdom, to bridge this gap in knowledge and awareness, to make make useful applications of non-local consciousness to interact with the divine realm and make miracles happen.
Yeah, absolutely. You ask Creator, are the chakras wholly components of the etheric body, or do they span all of the bodies? Are the chakras the organs of the etheric body, the astral body, or both? We know that dark spirit attachments attach, quote unquote, to the chakras. Are they aware of the etheric versus the astral? What can Creator tell us?
All right, Creator says, here the very clue is in the nature of attaching spirits and their agenda. They are parasites because they need the energy of other living things for their survival. So they attach to the so called chakras because they are an energy center. That too is a metaphorical description, causing people to think of them as like a physical organ, as your question describes or proposes, when this is not truly their makeup or how to think of them. The concept of an energy center is closer to the mark because they are a kind of way station as a receiver of life force energy coming from the divine realm you use to animate your body as a source of working energy. But that receiver is a construct of your consciousness. And this is a part that is more like a body in the sense of having an anatomical kind of governing function that is more a functional component of the body than the free-form consciousness of your soul extension and its myriad capabilities. In other words, there is an interface between the pure consciousness of your soul extension down in the physical that represents your spirit form, who you are, and all of the soul potential you embody, but still in the form of consciousness. That must interface with the physical body in order to inhabit and animate it with the role of providing oversight and direction through your intentions to make things happen. So, all of childhood is a learning curve while your consciousness from your soul entered that body in the womb and then must integrate in a way to be a kind of hands-on executive function on a physical level to help shape what the body is like and especially what it does. The chakras are a gateway between dimensions, the physical and the dimension of consciousness. So they have the properties of both in a kind of blended form. So a more precise description would simply be that the aspects of the physical body that are visible serve to contain an energy center of consciousness that governs the intake of life force energy and directs it where it needs to go. The complexity of all those functions are expressions of soul characteristics in a kind of framework that provides a sort of integrated pathway analogous to the nervous system, where instead of nerves going into tissues and send signals from the brain to make the muscles jump or send information back to the brain about heat and cold, touch and a painful stimulus, the consciousness connected through the chakras to the body is governing a more fundamental force in play. That is why spirits attach at those locations, because they get first crack at the incoming energy, so to speak, and will siphon some for themselves.
Well, Carl, if I had the means to edit some of the big name dictionaries out there, under the word chakra, I would put this definition. I would say the chakras are a gateway between dimensions, the physical and the dimension of consciousness. So they have the properties of both in a kind of blended form, straight from creators channeling right there. I think that's a wonderful definition of the word chakra. It's the first time I've encountered it.
Yes, me too. Me too, because I'm steeped in the lore of past spiritual workers of all kinds and this big new age expansion wanting something not religious at its basis,
Yeah,
and that's cost them in their thinking also, because you can't start to blend the two realms unless you believe in both, and this has caused a lot of rifts and needless gaps in thinking. But anyway, this is a profound revelation of the workings of consciousness being behind this all.
yeah,
And again, it sets apart a very clear distinction between raw energy that is used to keep the body going, coming from the ether,
right.
and raw energy that is of a higher grade, a higher information content that's coming from the soul. And that's what we're talking about, and why the chakras are here to help facilitate bringing whatever energy from the soul is needed to inform our spirit, our living divine consciousness that's housed within the body. So it's two different kinds of consciousness as energetic forms, and that can be a little confusing. But if the unifying theme is consciousness, it makes it a little easier to understand.
Well, the definition is, the gateway between dimensions, the physical dimension and the dimension of consciousness, and it has properties of both. So it's a blended form. It's not entirely physical, but it's not entirely the dimension of consciousness. So it's a quasi construct that serves a translation purpose. I think it's magnificent. You ask creator, how much of a healing dilemma and need is exhibited within the ether? Can creator tell us how empowered prayer and the lightworker healing protocol are the best means for accomplishing it?
All right, Creator says, we take your question to truly represent the ether as a kind of ground state of consciousness, and as such, a sort of launching pad energetically of many things required or requested by the higher states of consciousness representing life forms. and especially sentient beings like the human. Because the physical plane is heavily flawed and creates an environment that is imperfect as it is poorly understood by the sentient beings inhabiting it, in the same way they can harm themselves and one another physically, they can influence the higher realms of consciousness, indirectly at least, through the consequences on the physical and the consciousness they send out beyond their body, which can alter the energies of the ether and leave distortions. This is sort of analogous to creating bad weather in an atmosphere around the earth. It will have consequences, perhaps only for the beings who are airborne, who want to fly through a certain region, but encounter thunder and lightning, heavy precipitation, and so on. Just like beings on the ground engaged with their lives might get pummeled with heavy hailstones, drowned in a flood from heavy rain bursting from the heavens, or struck by lightning. But even further from the earth itself, because consciousness in non local form can travel anywhere, that consciousness can perturb the universe virtually anywhere, at least to some degree. And this creates, in a sense, bad weather that can increase in intensity when compounded by the consciousness of many, many beings who might be struggling and out of divine alignment, launching dark thoughts and hateful attacks on others, not realizing their thoughts do not stop at the borders of their skull, but can go everywhere and have effects beyond the body. Because human beings are attuned intuitively and energetically to many kinds of stimuli, they in turn are influenced by the accumulated thoughts of others that are in a kind of energetic aggregate of consciousness and will tune into it to see what the weather is like, so to speak, and may come away unsettled, agitated, and quite concerned if there is gossip about them out there in the ether, so to speak, or something threatening their species, like talk of war or threats to humanity as a whole. What is needed is a way to fix it, a way to heal not only what is going wrong, but its consequences. This is no different than any kind of needed housekeeping, like taking out the garbage. One of the biggest consequences of war is the need for massive cleanup and rebuilding. The same is true from all the bombardment of the ether by consciousness of various beings who are themselves perturbed, out of alignment, thrashing about, and sending forth ill considered energy that will cause a kind of wounding, a damage to the environment in the broadest sense, and influencing the makeup of the whole of the universe, if only to a small extent. But those perturbations can build, as we have said, and any kind of misalignment or imbalance of the universe will have a consequence karmically for you because it will be connected to you as its originator. And if what you create is discord, you become a bad actor and will have a comeuppance of some kind, forcing you to repay the wrongdoing and the imbalance it caused. That can be done the hard way through uh, suffering a similar degree of discord as you cause, or it can be done in a higher and better way through an offering of love as restitution. There could also be divine grace brought to bear to help you out of this dilemma, at least to some extent, in requesting healing through the divine realm for what ails you. And because we understand the picture is bigger than just you and your physical makeup, the Lightworker Healing Protocol has many components designed to attend to these more esoteric aspects, not just to be thorough and because we can, but because they also figure in things in an important way and are thus important to take care of and bring healing to restore better function as an end result of restoring balance in the universe. This is what you need to pray for, at least in more general terms, to address the needs you have as a physical being, at least right now, being a priority. The meaning of the prayer, the origin of the discord you are suffering, causing you to pray, or the potential road hazards you might face, will have as a logical extension the need to address the karmic underpinnings and the energetic consequences wherever they go, wherever they reside. And that could be on different timelines, in other lifetimes, and at distant realms throughout the galaxy and beyond. So, this is why prayer needs to be empowered to increase its reach, literally. Together, empowered prayer and the Lightworker Healing Protocol give you the tools you need to clean up your act and that of your fellow beings, both physical humans and extraterrestrials you tussle with, and who are intent on dragging you down. They menace your existence, in fact. They need healing even more than you do because your fate depends on them. And if you are not here to heal them, they will perish. You were created to heal your perpetrators. And even though they are your worst enemy, healing them will save you and will be the greatest act of giving, of loving kindness, and of divine expression in the history of the universe. This you can contribute to through the choice to participate in using these fine tools to better yourself and save humanity and other beings within the galaxy as part of the exercise. Because the empowered prayers and the Lightworker Healing Protocol both include everyone and everything. And that includes the etheric realm of consciousness and its repair. But you must choose to partner with us to have that happen. It is in your best interest to do all you can in order to guarantee a better future for you and everyone.
And the best way to partner with the divine is through empowered prayer and the Lightworker Healing Protocol. You can get our empowered prayer book, download it today, getwisdom.com/prayer, and also get the ebook describing the Lightworker Healing Protocol at getwisdom.com/LHP. That's all we have for this week's Get Wisdom Live, everybody. Thanks, Carl.
Thanks and be well.